Okay, so still at the Wijk aan Zee,
Wijk aan Zee also in 81. We
91,
played against Grandmaster Torre from Philippines.
the one who became the FIDE president? Or
No.
I'm
The FIDE president was Campomanes.
Campomanes.
Torre was the first Grandmaster from Philippines and probably the most talented and the best player ever from Philippines, you know.
And a friend of Bobby Fischer.
Yes, he was also a friend from Bobby and a good friend of mine also. But all our games were like this, you know, very sharp and very complicated, you know.
All right.
Okay, after knight f6, knight f3, e6, c4, we have a normal position from Queen's Indian. This time I played the Queen's Indian myself with black, you know. So after e3, bishop b7, bishop d3. This is a little bit more quiet for white, but playable, of course, a normal variation. So bishop e7, knight b3, pardon, b3. The alternative was knight c3 here instead of b3, but he plays later knight c3. I took in, now d5, and black is, in my opinion, the position is already even. Black equalized without any problem. But now after bishop b2, knight c6, knight bd2, and castle. Okay, the result is okay. Black has a good game already after the opening. Rook c1, rook c8, rook e1, rook e8, everything theory, more or less. You know. The black's idea is very clear. He takes immediately in c4, and after b takes c4, g6 he prepares bishop f8, bishop g7. I mean, very strong defensive position with bishop f8, bishop g7. This is the idea. And in one moment, the only way to play for white is to push d5 in one moment, you know. Yeah. So after g6, bishop b1, bishop f8, bishop a2, he prepares d5, you see. Okay. So now bishop g7, black is waiting, of course, and okay, he played d5 finally. You know. So now black takes in e8, knight takes back, takes in g7, takes with the king, takes in d5. Okay, everything is normal. And after knight e7, rook takes c8, knight takes c8, knight f1. Okay, now we look at the position, everything is very clear. He realized the idea d4, d5, but black can be more than satisfied with this position because he's clearly better. Why he's clearly better? Because all his pieces are better posted. I mean, they have the control over the central squares, and the pawn can't advance anymore. You know, the pawn from d5 will be weak finally. Finally, he lose the pawn. And the black bishop from b7 is clearly better than his opponent from a2. You know, every piece is better for black here, you know. Black controls all the squares, you know, has absolute control of the black squares. And later on, in any middle game, black is clearly better. All right, so black can be very satisfied, you know, after the opening. So now we try to show that white has some problems, and black has a good chance already to try to play for win. Yeah. All right, he understood that he has two weaknesses, a pawn and h pawn. Later on, he tries to get rid of the two weaknesses.
H pawn Y is a weakness.
You'll see, because he has to move something, you know. In one moment, he plays h4, h5, and, you know, doesn't have control. Anyway, black is better in all kind of position. Now here, everything starts, you see. We take control of all the central squares, trying to put the knight in c3 later on, you know. We control still the other knight comes to d6 and has no counterplay. For the moment, he's complete defensive position for white, you know. All right, bishop e3, he has to wait. Knight d6, look at the position. Very nice for black, no? So now, queen b2, very unpleasant, because in time trouble, such a move, you know, doesn't threaten everything clear in one move or two, but it's very difficult to play for white here, because you have no control and you have no counterplay. You have to wait, and it's very unpleasant, you see, in any position. So, okay, after knight f6, black can move here and there. White has to wait again. And the only way to do something with the knight h2, trying maybe later on to play knight g4 or h6, h5. Okay, queen c3, knight f1, queen e5, okay? Bishop b3. It was already threatened to take the pawn from d5. So knight e4, h5. Now, okay. The problem here is that we are not forced to accept the pawn from h5. For instance, if we take immediately in h5, it's not so clear. Knight h5, well, with the pawn is
No,
not
sorry.
good, with the knight, no?
With the knight, yes.
But if we take with the knight, now after knight g4, for instance, you see?
Knight g4?
Knight g4, yes. If you move, for instance, queen f4, normal move, because queen f4, queen d6, he has time to give you a check in d4. But even here, he has the position, he can't give check in d4 and has a very good activity for white, The pawn is not important in h5. He gave a pawn, the knight is there in h5, out of play for the moment.
Yeah.
And maybe the pawn from d5 could be dangerous. So, but it's not good to take the pawn, of course. But okay, if you don't take the pawn, he could get rid of the weakness, as I told you before, So, all right, I played queen f4. Now he has time to play f3 and later on to take in g6. Okay, so he took in g6. I took in g6. Okay, bishop c4. Knight e8. We move again to arrive with the knight in d6. You see, we have time. We're back. So, until here, black played an excellent game and clear advantage. After b5, it seems that white is completely lost here, because has no counterplay.
So he gave you the pawn, but you didn't took the pawn.
No, it's better to play b5. Now we threaten something. The pawn from a5 is still weak, and with the pawn in b5, if we have time to play, for instance, b4, is already very dangerous because we have a free pawn, and the pawn could be very, very dangerous. So now has to react very quickly, and after queen f1 check, queen f6, queen b1, he attacks the pawn. We are again both of us in time trouble here, and after queen d4, it seemed that black has already a winning game again. So he took the pawn in b5, and I took in d5. It seemed it was an important moment here. It seemed that black is already winning instead of taking in d5 with the bishop there. Yes, if we take in b5, he takes with the queen and bishop a6. It seems black wins by force.
Like that?
Taking in b5. Yes, in b5.
Yes.
Takes with the queen, and now bishop a6. It seems that white loses a piece.
Yes.
Because it's the threat, bishop takes f1.
Yes.
But has an unbelievable move that, refused the idea, queen e8. And you don't win the pawn anymore, the piece anymore. Because the knight is protected from e8, you see.
Yeah.
So finally I saw in the last moment, and now unfortunately I lost the pawn from b5. I took the pawn from d5, but it's not the same, you see.
Yeah. You didn't want to lose the b5 pawn.
Of course, yes.
After this.
Yes. So right, I saw it and I took in d5. But even here, black is much better, complete control, So it has to move back, bishop b3. Look, black controls, the table, the board.
Yes.
Yeah. Very unpleasant position for white again. So, okay, king f2. Now, knight b7, very good move because provokes a6. Now, the pawn in a6 is another weakness, you see. Later on, for endgame, you see. Every endgame, the pawn is almost lost in a6, you see. But it's not easy at all. You have to demonstrate a very good technique. So, okay, defensive again. Knight c6, knight e4. Well, he gives a pawn, very unpleasant, but, what can you do?
You have to accept it.
Yeah. So, okay, I took there, knight e5. Again, white is complete defensive, very unpleasant position, lost probably, if you play well, you see. So knight e5, queen c2, and here.
Why you didn't took the pawn here? Because the knight
Because-
was hang. But no.
No, if you take immediately there, he has some problems. He has some possibility to play bishop f3, and is a little bit unclear, Yeah.
Okay.
Winning probably for black also, but it was better to put the knight first in e5. Okay, queen c2, and after queen c2, we played
Bishop.
bishop d7. Yeah, queen d1. I mean, he tries to trade queens, but he lost the pawn. Queen e5, and now he played bishop f3, queen h4 check very well, and knight queen f4. And here, knight d5. The second moment here, black wins probably very quickly if now takes first in f3. Why? Because, okay, let's say knight takes f3. If you take with the pawn, is terrible attack after queen g3 check. If we take with the queen, we simply take in f3, takes, and bishop c6 and wins the pawn. 2 pawns up and completely winning for black.
Yes.
Probably lose the pawn from a7, but he loses also the pawn from a6, and we have bishop 2 pawns against knight, completely winning, you see.
True.
Okay, big time trouble. I didn't take in f3, and unfortunately we arrive in much more complicated position where it's much more difficult to win, you see. Okay, I play queen c4, it's all right, it's a good move, and now queen c5 check, and now I protected the knight, of course. I played f6. Good. Queen c3. Okay, now we have to demonstrate that this endgame is winning for white, you see. For black, pardon. And now I took there. It seems that there's no problem at all. It's still winning, no problem. But now I realize the fact that in some positions he has a good possibility to give a pawn if he arrives there, in such an endgame where you have bishop and pawn, and has nothing, only king against bishop and pawn and king, but you don't win because you have white bishop and the square in a1 is black. Therefore, this kind of endgame could be draw.
You can hide here.
By miracle. By miracle could be draw. So you have to be very careful not to arrive there. But it's much more complicated than this endgame that I told you before. They are completely winning for black with 2 pawns up. Okay, now you have to try to win the pawn and not giving the possibility to arrive in such an endgame. So unfortunately, I made the last move, king b6, and I gave him another chance, a tactical chance, because now, if you play the normal move g5, after knight h2, knight g4, probably don't win anymore. He gives you the pawn from a6, but you lose the pawn from f6, and that's very good chance to make a draw for white, you see. So I didn't like the idea, but I had to take in f5, you see. Now it's very complicated, you see, because he has some chances to arrive in that endgame that I told you before. If he can sacrifice later on the knight from f5 to give the knight against the pawn from f6, is probably draw if he has time to arrive in a1 with the king, So you have to win a very complicated endgame right now, you see. Probably you have a good chance to win, but you have to play the only moves to try to win such an endgame. Much more complicated than the other ones from before, So now we have to demonstrate that black has a very good chance to win, but I told you, very difficult. a5, and well, now again is winning, but only by playing in any position the only moves with black. Why is winning? Because we control all the squares with our bishop. The bishop controls all the squares, and the knight can't be has no time to be sacrificed against the pawn. And the last position will be a forced Zugzwang, where white has no move at all with his knight. We'll see. Very interesting until the end. Okay, so bishop d7. You have to move the only moves. Knight g8. He tries to give the knight, but he has no time. And here, finally, we arrived with our king in the center. He doesn't have time to take the pawn from a4 because now the king is much too far. And we try to attack with our king, the knight from h5, and later on the knight in another position. And it will be Zugzwang because it has no moves. You see? And everything is forced. So, again, we attack the knight. The only move is knight g3. Knight g7 loses, of course, because we control again the position by giving the bishop. We play f4, and that wins by force, Takes and f3. And this...
No chance to catch.
No, it's much. The knight is out of play and the king is much too far. Finished.
Yes.
So he's forced to play to g3, but now he's winning by force. And now f4. Now it's okay. Now you see, again we control all the squares. Has no move. Knight h2, the only move. And now after knight h1, we can give the pawn from a4 because again he has no time. He has to take in a4, the only move. And now we have time. Well, what can he play?
If he takes here.
Yeah, and now king e3. King e3, e3. Now has to give check because we threaten. Okay, he comes with the king, for instance. King b3, king f2. Okay, finished. King f2, king c3. No, king c3, king g2. King d2, king d4, the only move. Now we take there. King takes, f3 wins, king g3 wins. Both moves win. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, finished. But it was move by move, very complicated endgame. Maybe in one moment, by miracle, he could make a draw. I don't know, because it was very big time term. But I complicated myself by playing some other moves where I could play much better and win by force very quickly. Yeah. But it always like this. When it's time control and you have very little time for many moves, you can make some small mistakes like this, and you complicate your task yourself.
Yeah.
It happens. But well, finally it was okay. Finally, it was a very nice end game, and it was like a lesson again in end game. But it could happen that could be, all the way around. If he arrives with the king in a1, it's exceptional end game where he can make draw,
Exceptional draw.
Yeah. So
wasn't the case.
Well, chess is like this sometimes. But finally, here it was okay. Here we could win and demonstrate that the end game was winning. Yeah.
Nice. Beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Gheorghiu.
Yeah, very unusual end game. Yeah.
True.